Hello everyone and welcome to another nature tutorial by me, Frederik Steinmetz. And today we'll be creating a fish swarm of mackerels or sardines, you can choose, that is behaving like this. Alright, so as you've probably already figured this, making this fish swarm took a lot of testing, and I just want to save you the trouble of having to test all of that yourself. So what you can see here is the fish swarm. If I switch this to the actual fish, my viewport gets slower than the actual cycles render, which I found pretty funny. If I switch to rendered view, I could move my camera easily, but if I did not, I would have to wait like 20 seconds until my mouse movement did anything with the viewport. So kudos for Cycles, very nice render engine. Just one last thing, we're going to get these light streaks and the motion blur by actually compositing a Blender internal render on top of a Cycles render. And the awesome thing about this is we can use two scenes with two different render engines and composite them on top of each other. So this is great, and I was really happy when I found out that this works, and let's take advantage of that. And I did not find any pictures or any good pictures of a sardine, so we're going to use a mackerel, and I'm have to change into one of the views where a background image can be displayed, and then drag this mackerel right into my viewport. I got this off the internet and then made it, got it a transparent background in GIMP, and you can just use the image that is provided on the Blender homepage under download, right under this movie. So let's press N and go to our background images and increase the opacity of that. So now we have a fish that we can follow. Okay, this time we're actually going to use the default cube. Those are my favorite tutorials, those that can make use of the default cube. And let's just scale it down until it roughly fits the size of the mackerel. Let's tab into edit mode and also go into wireframe mode, and this is just a precaution that I take because I usually like this option to be enabled. So, but if I, enable, if I press B and make a box selection, you can see the problem. So just a precaution, I usually, as long as I don't need to see my surface, I am using, in edit mode, I am using the wireframe mode. So press E, extrude this, and move it up here to the mouth. And the mouth looks so weird because there was a pink hook in the mouth, and I needed to clone that out. So that doesn't matter because first we're not going to have a close look at the mouth, and also the mouth will get parts of its shape from the modeling that we do. Okay, you can see I extruded this again, and then I drag this all the way to the tail, and I press Ctrl R and insert an edge loop right here where the mackerel starts to get narrow, more narrow. Now I'm going to select this, press S, and scale this down until we have approximately the size of where the tail begins. I'll press E and extrude this out again. And actually, let's do something else first. Let's insert an edge loop over here, and I can see that I made a mistake here. Apparently, I only extruded this part, and actually this doesn't matter too much. What I'm going to do is insert the edge loop in the top view instead, and right-click to make it right in the middle. I'm going to delete these vertices, and I'm going to extrude these two out, and now I'm going to hold tab, and before I do that I need to switch this to vertex, that means snapping to my nearest vertex. And if I now drag this out and hold Control and move the mouse over this vertex, it will snap into the same X value of this vertex. And I can repeat that for the Z value and this Z value. Now they are perfectly aligned, and you can of course wonder why I did this and not just delete these two and repeat the procedure. That is because it's nice to know how to fix little errors like that one. I did not want to keep you from knowing that. Okay, you can see in the key status tools what I did back there, and I'll now add a modifier, and that is a mirror modifier. And since we started modeling in front view, but we actually were looking at the side, we need to change the mirror from X to Y. And now our fish is mirrored. Okay, so once we put a subsurface modifier, press Ctrl 2, on this you'll see a weird thing happening, and that is because we still have the middle faces. So go to face select mode, press A to deselect everything, and then draw a line or box right around those faces. And press X and delete the faces. Okay, now you can see that there is one more problem back here. Let's quickly spot that face. Actually, that was not a problem with the face. Those were two vertices that I didn't catch when I deleted the other ones. Okay, now we're good. Let's go back into side view again. And now let's insert our edge loop. Okay, inserting edge loops, as you could plainly see a second ago, is a great way to test whether your mesh is still doing what it's supposed to. So E again, and extrude and align this with the tip of the fin, of the tail fin over there. And again, insert an edge loop here. Let's rotate this a little. And let's do the same thing over here. Rotate this and maybe scale this up. And we're always trying to match the proportion of our preview image. And in this case, smaller is better. So rather than making this too large, make it too small, because if it's too large, it won't be covered by the entire texture. But if it's too small, there is no problem with extra space. So yeah, you can, if you want to, you can match the tail even more, but I'm pretty sure we're fine the way this is. Okay, so this is looking like a pretty decent fish already, but we want those two fins because they will actually make the fish look a lot more fishy. So let's go into side view actually, and you can see our fish is not round, it is rather a, I don't know, like a capsule. So I'm going to select these two, press S, then Z, and then scale them along the Z axis until this becomes more round. And then I'll select all these vertices and move them closer together. So this will make our fish more water dynamic or hydrodynamic, I guess. And let's have a look at the tail fin. This is scaling. The tail fin actually destroyed, or did not destroy, but interfered with our mirror modifier. So one way to prevent that is to enable clipping. And if I now go into top view, I can move these. These are already over the top. So clipping means that no vertex will be able to move across the middle line. And then same thing again, X and faces. So now our mirror modifier is restored again, and let's select these because the tail fin should be a lot more flat. Something like this. Just move this closer, and you can probably even make this more flat. this is to your own liking. Okay, I'll leave it at that. So let's make a dorsal fin. And you can plainly see over here we don't have enough faces to make a dorsal fin. If I were to extrude that, I would extrude most of the back, and that of course is not what I want. Let's bring this in even more because this fish is not very thick. It is not an American fish. Okay. Front view, and we can now insert another edge loop and move this over here because this is right at the beginning of the fin. Now, if I were to model a real fish and not a fish that needs to be very low poly because we want it as a particle, I would never do what I'm about to do. But since we want to save polys at all cost, I think we're okay with it. So I'll press V now, and I deselect clipping, press W in case this created vertices that I didn't want. Press V, and that will move these vertices out. Actually, I could have just, pulled these vertices out. And now I'm going to select both of them, press Alt-E and say vertices only, and enable clipping again and move them right to the middle. And now this is the horrible part. I'm going to insert, where is my last vertex? There it is. I'm going to insert a triangle. So, big no-no, but in this case it saves us a lot of polys. We would have to insert another edge loop, and that would have cost, with the subdivision surface, that would have cost a lot of vertices, and something did not work over here. Okay, that's why I did not have the entire. And you can already see that this created a very weird mesh, but we'll have to live with that. Let's go back to vertex select mode, and in the front view again, extrude this out, and then immediately right click and then just move this out a tiny bit, extrude it out again, and now to your liking, adjust it to match the dorsal fin. Okay, that should do. And over here press F to close this. Okay, that should do. Let's repeat the same procedure with the ventral fin. Disable clipping again. Enable it again, Alt-E. And make sure you move it only along the y-axis. And find the third vertex, F, and same here. One, this is the right one. Okay, Alt click on this and extrude it out. Right click, extrude it out just a little bit, and now just bring these vertices in position, like so. Okay, that is our fish from the side, looking pretty good actually. Okay, and let's insert these, how do you say, chest fins? I'm not sure. It looks like we're going to need 2 more edge loops to match the head, or actually at least 1 to match the width of that fin. And let's go to face select mode, extrude this one and press S and Z. And this way we can, actually let's not do that, let's extrude this, right click and select vertex, B, deselect those by using the middle mouse, by dragging with the middle mouse button, and now move these down just in Z, and move these out just in Y. Okay, Now we have a more narrow thing to work with, and we have doubles here. It's not a good idea because they might get removed. So move them a tiny bit as well, and go to face select mode. In the top view, extrude this out, and this is going to be the fin. Now don't make this too big. It might be too small to be realistic, but since those fish are going to move very fast, it's better to make this too small, because you're not going to see it that well anyways. But if it's too big, it might be that it collides with the other particles, or it intersects. And in reality, fish that swim very fast don't move those fins at all. They get the entire speed that they're having from the tail fin. So this is not unrealistic at all. And here we go. This is our swarm fish. And since later on we are going to have them in the viewport as a lot of particles, I'm not going to show the subsurf modifier in. Okay, now that we have finished modeling the fish, I realized something, and there are duplicate faces, and this is very weird. For example, this one we don't need. And let's move this vertex along to the middle, and the same with this one, and select faces, and you'll see there's a very smooshed face. So select it and delete it, and do the same thing with this one. So you see another reason why I really don't like triangles. And also this little dent here, that also comes from the problem that the subsurf modifier has with triangles. So if you can avoid them, but in this case we'll be fine. So go into top view and press Alt G and Shift C, and that will center the cursor and your object in the middle of the scene, and maybe make a little adjustment over here. That's fine. And press Shift A, armature single bone. And now if we go into edit mode and rotate this 90-degree counterclockwise, so R minus 90, and we can move this bone to the very tip of the fish. Now let's take it and move it until here. Extrude it by pressing E and move this until here. Extrude once more and move it until it's at the start of the tail fin, and extrude once more until it covers the entire tail fin. So if we select all these bones, we can see that we now have a very simple armature that will deform our fish. And in order to tell it to deform our fish, we have to select the fish, shift select the armature, and then press Ctrl P and choose with automatic weights. And if I now go into pose mode by pressing Ctrl Tab, and then go take the fish and press Ctrl Tab as well, we are in weight paint mode. And you can see if I now select the bone, you will see the according vertex groups selected, especially if I go over here. You can see the vertex groups switch. Okay, very nice. So we can immediately and manually influence the vertex groups, but apparently this has worked out quite well already, except for that. Okay, so in front view, let's take all these vertices that do not belong to the tail and click remove, and that takes care of that problem. Okay, fish looks a little deformed, but that is because our subsurf modifier is in front of the armature. So we want the fish to deform first and then get smoothed out again by the subsurf modifier. So since our fish is not doing acrobatics like that, I think we're good. We can always go back and correct that later. So I want to animate the fish by using just one single bone, and that is the parent bone, the head bone. So I'll go into this and add a constraint, and that will be the copy rotation constraint. And first I need to set the armature and then the parent bone. And that does something really weird, and that is because world space and world space are selected and not post space. Now this doesn't do anything right now, because the bone is already inheriting the rotation from its parent. But if we invert the z-axis and rotate this bone, we can see that still nothing happens, and that is because of the bone roll. If I go into the armature and have my axis displayed here, you can see that in this bone the x-axis points up. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure why Blender does this, but if you press Ctrl N and then choose z-axis, all the bones are pointing into the same directions. And if I now rotate this bone, you can see that the middle bone stays still, and that is it inherits the rotation of this one, and then it sort of adds the invert again. So it in essence it stays still. So let's do the same thing with this bone. Add a constraint, copy rotation, and again armature and bone. This time don't invert it, but local space and local space. Okay, now our fish is starting to do a wiggly motion. Let's do this one more time. Add constraint, copy rotation, armature, bone. And of course local space and local space. Now if I rotate my head, my fish rotates with it. And you can see that you can, if you want to, subdivide those bones once more, because my fish is actually doing a little bit of a weird thing over here, and you can also shorten the fish, but for the sake of this tutorial we'll leave the fish as it is right now, and you can download the original fish that I made if you're not happy with this one. So go into the graph editor and make this a little larger and press I to insert a rotation keyframe. And actually we should, shift left arrow, we should rotate the fish a little bit to this part, I, rotation, and even better, now go to frame 21 and click on this keyframe here, press K, that selects all the keyframes, press Shift D and X and move the keyframes over here until this turns yellow. Now we're going to add a modifier, and that is cycles. This has nothing to do with the render engine. I have the wrong keyframe selected. The modifier will only work for one keyframe, one rotation, and that is the Z rotation. So if we have the Z curve selected and add the modifier cycles, you will see our entire curve turns to the sine wave and our fish is wiggling indefinitely, which is exactly what we want. With that in mind, we can continue on. We can add a texture to the fish. So press Ctrl right arrow until you get to this texture view, and go select the fish, go into edit mode and press U and project from view. And that will project our fish onto this square. Now take the mackerel JPEG and probably just project from view again, and now scale it up, and you can over here go into textured view. By the way, if you're experiencing problems with this, cycles doesn't work well with textures. So switch back to the texture, to the Blender render if you are in cycles, in order to work with textures. And I think if I delete this, I have a shadeless view, which is correct. And in the shadeless view, it's a lot easier to determine what I am doing. So select the fish, tap, and let's position these vertices. And since we modeled from that image as a background, it shouldn't be too hard to place all of them. And you might have noticed that even though I cleared the alpha of the fish, the background, most of it is still here, and that is something I find really weird, but it will be gone once you press pre-multiply. There it is. Okay, now our fish our alpha is pre-multiplied, and it's using the actual alpha channel of the fish. So you can move this in here. And now let's move a few of these vertices to be lower than the actual fish. And the reason for that is we're going to make the fish have a white color, and wherever the vertices or wherever it will stand out, it will be alpha. Our fish will be white, and that is because those fish have a very white belly, and if those fish turn, they will produce somewhat of a little flash towards the camera, and you can see that in swarming fish. Of course, the belly is not that visible, or it's more visible at the actual belly. And let's have a look. This looks fairly decent. Okay, we can keep it at that. The top view is a little weird, so I'll just take this vertex, take this one and move it down, and take this one, move it up. The most important part is that you don't squeeze the eye, because we're going to see the fish from the side, and also the human brain is especially sensitive to faces. That means if there's something wrong with the eyes or the face, that is the first thing we'll notice. But since they're moving really fast, I think this is it. And we now have a nice swarming fish. So now let's get to the fun part. Let's get to the particles. And for that, I'm going to change into this view. And I'm going to make the subsurf modifier invisible, because later on we're going to be displaying a lot of these fish, and I don't want to turn down or slow down my viewport too much. So let's add an emitter mesh cube and scale it up in Z direction, something like this. Actually, let's make it just a little bit larger, and that should do. Okay, this is going to be our emitter, and let's just give this a particle system. Let's call this fish, and the particle settings, let's call it swarm. There we go. And we can put the number up to 2000. My machine was able to play that back sort of with a 24 frame rate, so that's fine. I don't need to go any lower. But the particles, of course, this is not fish behavior, so let's change a lot of these settings. First of all, the particles, I don't want our fish to die, so just put in a very high number here. And also, I don't want our fish to get born during the animation, so let's put this to 1. So all the particles are instantly born at frame 1. So this is what frame 1 looks like. Okay, then, as the title of the tutorial suggests, these are supposed to be Boyd's particles. You can find this option here down here in the physics panel, and we don't want them to land, we don't want them to climb. They are swimming, but since Blender doesn't know they are underwater, they're flying. So let's have a look at these settings. I certainly don't want any of the fish to stop entirely, so I'm going to increase this a little. If you increase this a lot, some weird behavior will occur, so I'll just copy my settings here. The max acceleration. This is if a fish is following one rule and then another one interferes, the fish will accelerate in order to follow the second rule. Since our swarm is supposed to have a fairly uniform speed, I don't want the acceleration to be that high. And this is the angular velocity. This is sort of how fast the fish is allowed to go sideways, like not in the direction of its mouth. I do want that fairly low, because fish don't really swim sideways, they swim forward. And also, since we have a lot of fish, I want to give them a little bit of personal space. Okay, so let's just leave this running. You can now see that the fish are separating. Also, you can see that they are not separating uniformly, but they form flocks. And that is because we have a separate rule here, but after the separate rule, down in the hierarchy, there's a flock rule. So once they're separated far enough, they will attend to the second rule and flock. Let's see what happens if I put this rule in front of the separate. You'll see they'll flock and then they'll separate. Okay. We don't want them to flock randomly. We want them to have a motion around a vortex to sort of form a fish tornado. So I'm not going to use the flock rule at all, but instead I'm going to add a curve, Bezier curve, R90 and RZ90, so we can see what the curve is doing from the front view. Okay, this curve is supposed to be a vortex field, so a force field in the physics tab, and set this to vortex. And since 2.5, we can use a curve as the shape of the force field, in this case the shape of the vortex. And we want the particles to be drawn toward that curve. So I'm going to insert a goal here, and that goal is going to be my curve, Bezier curve. Let's rename that to vortex so we can easily find it. And now the particles should seek that goal. And they do. Alright, this is starting to look pretty good. But I do want a little bit of variation. Let's have a look at what happens at if we increase the particle number to 20,000. And one last thing in the void settings. This here is the banking of the particles. And banking means if I have a look at this fish, and this is the angle I'm looking at it, then banking would be its rotation around its local body axis, like this. This would be banking. And pitching, of course, would be how far he puts his nose down, like that. Okay, so I'm going to set the banking to 1.3. They can bank if they want to, but I don't want them to put their nose down too much. Still, I don't want all my fish to be horizontal. That would look really weird. So I'll just limit the pitching to 1.2. And that should do. Also going to decrease the rule fuzziness. And I'll press bake. And there we have it. The particles need a few frames to get organized. But then they are separating way too much. So one way to fix that is to go back into the particle settings, free bake, and put the goal rule above the separate rule. So right now they are going to find the vortex, and only if they are too close to each other, they will start separating. And also you can see that my cube here is occluding the vortex. So if I want to see the particles, I could go into the display mode and set this to wire. This does work, but the problem is once we replace the particles with the actual fish, then the fish will be displayed in wire mode. And that is not something I want. So what you select here is the highest display possible in this hierarchy. Okay, what we're going to do is we'll give them a material, and this will be a halo material. Just call this halo. Okay, and now the cube will be displayed as a couple of points. And since the swarm is very big, this is actually not sure if this was the best idea. We'll find our cube, I'm sure. You can see that this is still sort of a sausage-like motion, and I guess if I'm not baking the particles, they do weird stuff. This actually looks pretty cool, like an angel or something. But let's give them a more uniform, a less uniform motion. Let's increase the noise of the vortex and also the inflow. And inflow, if you hover over this, it says the inward component of the vortex force. And what I found this to do is once the particles get sucked in by the vortex, this is the speed from which they turn from their normal state to their vortexed state. I hope that makes any sense. Let's increase the randomness even more. Let's add a force field turbulence and these fields are usually represented by empties. And let's set the strength up to 2, and let's try to bake this again. And baking the particles gives us this result. See, it sort of looks fine in the beginning, but then they really clump to the vortex. And I toyed around with those settings a little, but if I set this vortex to have a minimum, then the fish inside of the minimum do some really crazy stuff. So the easiest way to avoid this problem was just to scale down the entire scene. So let's have a look at the dimensions of this thing, and let's make this scene something like this small. And also let's change the emission from phases to volume and from jitter to random. Now the particles should have the same distance from the vortex, but since the entire scene is smaller, it will look like they have a much bigger distance from the vortex. Okay, so that looks a lot better, and now we have our swarm that is not too uniform and not too crazy either. If you want, you can go ahead and increase the strength of the turbulence in order to make this swarm a little more crazy, and also you can increase the strength of the vortex. Oh, the noise point. This is supposed to be 0.5. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. Okay, that looks a lot nicer. Now the fish are going around the vortex, but not too uniform. Okay, good. I think I can live with that. Now, let's have a look in top view and have a look at the particles if they are actually using the fish. So, object and cube. Yeah, I should definitely rename that into fish. Okay, you can see this is slowing down my viewport, so easiest way to temporarily fix that is we turn down the display to 10%. Okay, now if we have a look at this, let's actually turn that down even more. Okay, we can clearly see that the fish are not going straight, they are going sideways. And the reason for that is, in the Boyd's particles, the y-axis, the local y-axis, is what is forward for the fish. And that means right now the fish would be going in this direction, because this is what in local orientation the forward axis is as far as the Boyd particles are concerned. So let's take the armature and rotate it 180 degrees. Now the local axis of the fish, because it was parent to the armature, has switched its direction. So right now this is perfect, but our fish is not pointing in this direction. So let's disable clipping if you haven't already in the mirror, modifier, and go into edit mode. And everything you do in edit mode does not change the local axis of your object. The only way to change the local axis of your object is to rotate it in object mode. So let's press R90, and you can see now the head is pointing towards our local y-axis. Of course, this looks kind of weird, and it is very important that you now press period and do the same thing for the armature, R90. Okay. Of course, the fish looks kind of weird, and that is because we changed the local axis of the object, and that means it's now no longer has to be mirrored along its y-axis, but along its x-axis. And this way, our fish is pointing, or the head of the fish is towards its, or is in the direction of its local y-axis, and that should actually make the fish swim forward. Alright, they actually do. One weird thing is they're not moving even though the armature is moving, and the way to fix that I found is to press Shift 2 in order to get the fish here to be visible, and you can see this fish is really big. So let's just press comma again and scale down the fish, This does not affect the overall size of those fish because we're not scaling in edit mode. The 0.05 standard size of the fish particles is actually relative to this scale. So if I was to scale down in edit mode, that would actually change the size of the fish. Let's have a look. We'll go to frame 70 because this is where they're already sort of organized. And you can see they are swimming towards in the direction of their heads, which is what we want. And they're already organizing. Okay, they're starting to look pretty good. So now that our swarm is starting to organize, the fish still look very uniform. And to change that, we're going to make duplicates of the fish and the armature, and then offset the animation. So select them both and press Shift D, and do this twice. Of course, if we scrub through the timeline right now, they would all move in sync. So let's select this armature and make sure this arrow is selected, and that means that only the objects that are active show up in the graph editor. Press A twice to select all the keyframes and press G and 2. And let's do something similar with this one. Press G and 4. Okay, now you can see they're not uniform anymore. This one is not off enough, so press G and 1. There we go. Now they're nice and offset. But of course, those two objects here, the two new fish, will not be regarded by the particle system. So press Ctrl G, make them into a group and call them fish. Okay, now get into the emitter settings right here and change the object that is for the visualization over here and change that to group and choose fish, and don't choose local, because then the particles will be offset by the distance of the fish to the center of the scene. So that would be offset a lot. Increase the particles on display. That seems to be no problem. Okay, let's look at this from the top view. They seem to form a nice ball. And of course, at this point, it is not possible to preview the animation anymore. So this just won't work, at least with my card. You can, of course, OpenGL render you've seen, but to be honest with you, at this point, I started experimenting with the cycles render because, funny enough, it's actually, or at least it appeared to me, faster than the viewport. Because Cyclist has something called instance rendering, and particle systems, array, and similar modifiers, they create copies of objects. I'm not sure how it works. It's just that duplicates of objects render really, really fast. Let's have a look at that, and let's just already start with the render settings. I'll decrease this back to 1 and have a look at the fish. That concludes the first part of the tutorial. In the second part, we'll get ready to render the swarm, and we'll also composite a Blender internal rendering on top of a Cycles rendering. And this way we'll get motion blur, which is not available in Cycles natively yet. And if you like this tutorial, I'd like you to check out our webpage. It's blenderdiplom.com, and you'll find a lot of different tutorials there, from smoke, VFX, over modeling and rendering tutorials. So please give us a visit. Thank you. And until next time, goodbye.